I realized it way too late. If you stare at the bridge long enough, it starts staring back at you. At first, you just notice people. Then, the same people. And then, you realize someone is already watching you. I'm a journalist, not a blogger, not into the paranormal, not someone who chases urban legends. I've spent years writing about the city, old neighborhoods, disappearances, abandoned buildings. Work like that trains you to stop believing in anything supernatural. Almost every scary story has a real explanation. Money, lies, illness, cruelty. That's exactly why this isn't a horror story. It's a habit, a professional instinct to go where you're not supposed to go. At that time, I was renting a small apartment in an old building in Manhattan, on the east side. The kind of building that looks great in photos. Dark brick, narrow windows, an old elevator with shaky doors. But inside, something is always creaking, and it smells like dust and damp plaster. From my bedroom window, if you lean just a little closer to the glass, the bridge was right there, fully visible between the buildings. Not the whole thing, but enough. A stone tower, lines of cables stretching into the dark, a clear view of the walkway where you could easily make out people at night, and the black water far below. Nearby, old high-rises stood. Not modern glass boxes, but heavy pre-war buildings with dark windows and cornices. At night, all of it felt especially muted, like the bridge wasn't hanging over a river, but over emptiness. I always liked that view. It was old New York, the kind that hasn't been polished for postcards yet. Stone, metal, wind, the yellow light of a few scattered windows. It felt like if you stared at it long enough at night, you might catch a glimpse of the city the way it was 100 years ago. And in a way, that's exactly what did happen. It all started in November. At the time, I was working on a series about old places in the city, where strange accidents had been happening for years. Not supernatural, just statistically bad locations. Intersections where people get hit more often. Stations where bodies keep turning up. Buildings where people jump from the roofs too often. I came across an old newspaper clipping about the bridge. It briefly mentioned that in the first decades after it opened, there were regular nighttime incidents, described very carefully in the papers. Disappearances, falls, people seen walking along the pedestrian path late at night, and then never found anywhere. Just ordinary city tragedies. But one line from a late 19th century newspaper stuck with me. Some night guards claimed that in the fog, those who can no longer be on the bridge step out onto the walkway. I smirked when I read it. Typical old newspaper language. That's just how they used to write back then. Still, I kept the clipping, just as a detail for the story. That same night I saw it for the first time. It was around 1:30 a.m. I was sitting in the kitchen with my laptop, finishing up a piece, and at some point I got up to grab some water. I didn't turn on the lights in the room. Only the lamp over the stove was on. On my way back, I glanced at the window without really thinking. Someone was standing on the bridge. Let me say this right away. People on the bridge at night aren't unusual. There's always someone there. Tourists, runners, cyclists, couples, random people who feel like taking a walk. But this person was standing unnaturally still, right in the middle of the walkway, facing Manhattan. Not walking, not leaning on the railing, not looking down, just standing. From my window, it was a dark silhouette against a lighter background. I watched for maybe 10 seconds, 15 at most. Then a second silhouette appeared next to him, then another one. They showed up like they hadn't walked there, but had already been there, like I just hadn't noticed them right away. All three were standing at the same distance from each other, and none of them moved. I even opened the window even though cold, damp air immediately drifted in from outside. I didn't hear anything unusual. Cars below. A distant siren. A door slamming somewhere. And on the bridge, 3 black figures. After about a minute, one of them slowly raised an arm. He didn't wave, didn't call out, just lifted it, like someone pointing at something ahead. And in that moment, something inside me tightened in a really bad way. Not even fear. More like the feeling that I was looking at something I wasn't meant to see. I stepped away from the window. Then I came back. The figures were gone. The next day I laughed it off. Night, exhaustion, reflections, fog, perspective. All of that is easy to explain. But the next night I saw people on the bridge again. This time there were 5 of them. And again, the same thing. They stood too evenly, too quietly, for too long. I grabbed my phone and tried to zoom in with the camera, but the image came out dirty, shaky, full of grain. In the photo, they were just dark blotches against the lights. Nothing you could actually show to someone else. By the 3rd night, I was already waiting. It's embarrassing to admit, but yeah, I was waiting. He finished work early, turned off most of the lights, and sat where I could see the window. Nothing happened until about 1 a.m. Then one silhouette appeared on the bridge, then a second, then a third. This time, they weren't standing still. They were walking, slowly, in one direction, in a line, with the same pace, like they weren't walking across a bridge at night, but down a hallway. I suddenly realized they were wearing something long and dark. Not coats, not cloaks. The distance was too far to see clearly, but the clothes looked old-fashioned, too straight, too heavy. And the worst part was something else. There was no one else on the bridge. At all. No runners, no cyclists, no tourists, no blinking phone lights. Just an empty bridge and those figures. I watched until they reached the stone tower. The structure blocked them from view. I waited for them to come out on the other side. They didn't. At that point, it didn't feel like fatigue anymore. In the morning, I found an old folder with archived notes on my laptop and started digging. Within a couple of hours, I already had printouts spread out, a few newspaper clippings, a police report from the early 20th century, a mention of a night watchman who supposedly quit after seeing a procession on the walkway 3 times during hours when the bridge was empty, and one more detail, very brief. In 1911, a reporter named Arthur Bell lived in one of the nearby high-rises, with a partial view of the bridge. He wrote about urban anomalies and disappeared under unclear circumstances. The last time he was seen, he was standing by his window at night. In his apartment, they found a notebook, where several pages were devoted to people on the bridge who always walk toward a place no one returns from. The notebook didn't survive. At least there was no public access to it. That's where I should have stopped. But if journalists knew when to stop, half the obituaries wouldn't start with, "He was just trying to figure things out." I called the guy I knew, an archivist at the municipal library. I told him I was gathering material on old urban legends. He laughed it off, but said he'd check if there was anything on that reporter. And that evening, I went to a bar near my place where some of the local old-timers like to hang out. Not because I believed in stories, but because in places like that, you sometimes hear details that never make it into official records. That's where I met Marty. He was around 70, maybe older. A born and raised New Yorker who'd spent his whole life in the city. When he heard I was writing about the bridge, he perked up at first, and then suddenly went quiet. "What exactly about the bridge?" he asked. I told him I was collecting stories about nighttime incidents and old rumors. "Rumors come in different kinds," he said. "Some are for tourists. Others are for the people who live here. Those are better not repeated." I asked why. He took a sip of his beer, wiped his mouth, and said, "Because some things don't like being watched for too long." It sounded like one of those stock lines old guys used to make an impression. But he didn't smile. He wasn't playing it up. I could tell right away. Carefully, I asked if he had ever seen anything himself. He stayed silent for a while, then said, "My mom grew up in a house by the water, before they rebuilt everything there. She used to say that on some nights, the ones who once decided not to go back home walk across the bridge. The ones the city erased. Drunks, workers, kids, women, people with no names. If you watch them long enough, sooner or later, they look back." I smirked and asked where that kind of certainty came from. He looked up at me. "Because my older brother once decided it was just a nice story, too." I didn't get it right away. "He disappeared?" I asked. Marty nodded. 68. Lived in that tower right there. He pointed toward the bar window. Said he kept seeing the same people on the bridge at night. Then he started writing down the dates. Then he started going out to get a closer look. Then he was gone. No body, no witnesses. After that, I actually felt uneasy for real. Not because I suddenly believed in ghosts, but because the scariest thing in any urban legend is repetition. When the same story gets told decades apart by people who don't even know each other. "If you see them again, don't count them," Marty added. "Don't count what?" "How many there are." I asked why. He shrugged. "That's what my mom used to say." It sounded stupid. But that night, when I sat by the window again, I caught myself being afraid to count. They showed up at 1:17. I remember the exact time because my laptop notification flashed at that moment, and I instinctively glanced at the screen. First one silhouette, then another, then more. They were coming out of the darkness near the tower, like they weren't walking on the bridge, but stepping out from somewhere behind it. This time they weren't moving evenly. One lagged behind a little. Another seemed to limp. The third had his head tilted at an angle, like his neck had been broken once and never healed right. I gripped the windowsill. They were moving in my direction. Not toward me exactly, of course, but toward the side of the bridge closer to my building. Halfway across, one of them stopped and slowly turned his head. Even from that distance, I could feel that he was looking straight at my building. My palms went sweaty. I suddenly became very aware that I was standing in the light, and outside the glass was empty black night. And if someone really was looking in, they could see me better than I could see them. I immediately turned off the lights in the room. When my eyes adjusted to the dark, I went back to the window. The figures were still there, but now there were fewer of them. Or maybe it just felt that way. And then I noticed something else. In one of the windows of the old high-rise across the street, dark, almost always empty, someone was standing there too, high up, at a level where, just like from my apartment, there was a view of the bridge, and whoever that was, they were looking at it too. The next day I found out the building across the street was almost completely unoccupied. Some of the apartments had been bought out for renovation. Others were sitting empty after a legal dispute between the owners. At night, there shouldn't have been almost anyone there. I started digging into information about the high-rises near the bridge. I found out that over the past 100+ years, there had been at least several cases where people living in apartments with a view of the bridge had disappeared or died under strange circumstances. One fell out of a window. Another walked out of his apartment barefoot at night and never came back. A third, a woman, spent weeks telling her sister that someone was standing on the bridge and watching her window. Then she was found in the building hallway, alive, but in a condition where she could never explain anything clearly again. I stopped sleeping well. That's not a figure of speech. I was actually falling apart. During the day, I moved around like I was in a fog. In the evenings, I caught myself rushing home. Not because I wanted to rest, but because I was afraid of missing another night. That's when I realized things had become dangerous. Not the bridge, not the silhouettes. Me. I started being drawn to it like it was an illness. I tried to resist. I stayed late at the office, crashed at a friend's place in Queens, got drunk on purpose just to pass out and not see anything. But even then, I would wake up in the middle of the night with this feeling that I had to look out the window, like something important was happening there without me. The archivist texted me 3 days later, said he'd found something on Arthur Bell, a mention in a police report. Bell had told a colleague that at night he didn't just see the same people on the bridge. He believed that sometimes someone new appeared among them. I read that several times. Someone new. Meaning it wasn't just old shadows, if that's even what they were. Something, or someone, was adding to that procession. There was another line attached to the report, apparently written by the investigator. 2 days before his disappearance, Bell claimed he recognized one of the figures as a man living in a nearby building, even though that man was confirmed to be inside his apartment at the time. That's what broke me. I printed everything I had, and for the first time, decided to go out to the bridge at night. Not out of courage. The opposite. I thought that if I saw it for myself and realized there was nothing there, it would all end. Perspective. Night lighting. People. Fog. That's it. Period. I picked a weekday close to 1 a.m. There were still a few occasional pedestrians and cyclists on the bridge. The wind was strong. The cables hummed. Under my feet, the walkway vibrated slightly from the rare cars passing on the traffic side. When you walk there alone at night, especially in the cold, the bridge stops being beautiful. It turns into a huge mechanism. Old, rough, alien. I walked to about the spot where I usually saw the silhouettes from my window and stopped. Nothing. Just lights, water, and wind. I even laughed out of relief. Actually laughed. Took out my phone, recorded a short video of the empty walkway, and sent it to myself as proof that I was turning into an idiot. And then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. About 20 meters away, a man in a long, dark coat was walking toward me. On the bridge, that didn't look unusual, but he was moving too slowly, and he didn't raise his head. I stepped aside to let him pass. He didn't pass. He stopped right in front of me. I couldn't really see his face under the brim of his hat. Or maybe it was a hood. I still can't say for sure. But a cold feeling ran down my spine immediately. "Late for a walk," I said. He didn't answer. I took a step back, and at that moment I noticed that there were more people standing behind him on the walkway. I hadn't heard them approach. There were maybe 6 or 7 of them, maybe more. They stood along the path like they were waiting for something. One of them raised his head, and I recognized the face. It was a man from my building, 6th floor. I'd seen him a few times by the mailboxes. Thin, hunched, always wearing a cap. But the problem was, I knew for a fact he had died 2 weeks earlier. Everyone in our building had been talking about how long his body had been lying in the apartment before they found him. I just froze. And then someone very quietly said right next to my ear, "You've been watching for a long time." I flinched so hard I almost lost my balance. There was no one next to me. When I looked up again, the walkway was empty. Completely. I left the bridge almost running. Near the exit, I looked back. No one was following me. At home, for the first time through all of this, I locked the door with every lock I had. And for the first time, I closed the curtains. The next morning, I told myself I was done. Started looking for another apartment. Even scheduled a viewing for a studio in another neighborhood. But that same day, something happened that made it impossible to just leave. There was an envelope lying by my door. Old gray, no stamp, no address. Inside, a sheet of paper folded in 4. There was a single paragraph typed on it, not handwritten. Typed, like on a typewriter or a very old printer. You can't see the beginning from the window, only the continuation. If you want to understand, watch the windows, not the bridge. No signature. I read it at least 10 times. Then I ran out into the hallway and asked my neighbor if she'd seen who left the envelope. She said no. There were no cameras on the floor. I should have thrown that letter away. Instead, that evening I sat by the window with the lights off and looked not at the bridge, but at the old high-rises nearby. At first, nothing. Then in one window a dim yellow light flickered on. Then in another. Then in one higher up. The windows lit up not like normal apartments. Too slowly. Like someone was opening shutters one by one. And in every lit window someone was standing. My mouth went dry. Because I suddenly realized that all those windows were positioned, so they had a view of the bridge. Which meant I wasn't the only one watching. People had been watching the bridge for decades, from different buildings, from different times. And then, in one of those windows, I saw myself. I know how that sounds, but I didn't mistake it. It was me, my figure, my posture, the same tilt of the head. Someone was standing by a window in a dark room, looking at the same place I was looking. Except it wasn't my window. It was in the old high-rise across the street, a few floors higher, in a building that was supposed to be almost empty. I jerked back so hard I hit my back against the wardrobe. When I came back to the window, the light in that window was already off. I didn't sleep until morning. The next day I managed to get access to that building through a photographer I knew who sometimes shot urban interiors. I told them I was looking for an angle for a piece about pre-war architecture. They let me in for a couple of hours. Inside it was quiet like a closed museum. Dusty hallways, worn out walls, old signs, the smell of wood and mold. Many of the apartments were empty. Some were under renovation. On the floor where the window should have been, there were 3 closed doors and one slightly open. I went in. The apartment was small, almost the same layout as mine. Bare walls, old parquet floors, marks where furniture used to stand, and the window. It had almost the same view of the bridge. On the floor, against the wall under the window, there was a notebook, very old, with a swollen cover. I picked it up and immediately saw the name on the first page. Arthur Bell. Something in my chest dropped right then. I opened the notebook. Most of the pages were blank or damaged, but a few entries were still there. Short, broken, like they were written by someone who hadn't slept in a long time. First you see them on the bridge. Then you start noticing the ones watching from the windows. The worst part is when you see yourself in another window. My hands started shaking. I looked up and stared at the glass. It reflected the room. And for a second, it felt like someone was standing by the opposite wall. I turned around. No one there. I left, took the notebook with me, and that evening I decided to end it. Not investigate, not write anything, not look for explanations. Just pack my things and stay with a friend for at least a week. But that night Marty called me. I never gave him my number. I still don't know how he got it. He said just one thing. Don't look out the window tonight. No matter what happens, don't look. I asked what was going on. He was breathing heavily into the phone. Then the line went dead. I stood there holding the phone, feeling everything inside me go cold. Marty said not to look. I remembered that. I remembered it very clearly. But at some point I realized I couldn't not look. Like if I didn't go to the window right now, something would happen without me. Something that had to do with me. I slowly walked over to the curtains, paused for a second, got myself thinking I could just step away, just go to bed, just not start this again. But I didn't step away. I pulled the curtain aside just a little. There were people standing on the bridge, a lot of them. They filled the entire visible stretch. Still, dark, elongated figures. Some were looking down, some at the buildings, some straight at my floor, and among them, almost at the very edge, stood me, not a reflection, not someone who looked like me. Me. Same t-shirt I was wearing at home, same face, and he was looking straight at my window. I jumped back, the curtain slipping out of my hands. There was a ringing in my ears so loud I could barely hear anything real anymore. I backed toward the door, grabbed my jacket and my keys, and ran out of the apartment. I didn't wait for the elevator. I took the stairs. Outside it was damp, windy, almost empty. I didn't even understand where I was going, but within a minute I was already heading toward the bridge. It was some kind of instinct. To check. To be sure. To catch myself in a hallucination. When I reached the entrance to the bridge, there was no one there. Completely empty. No crowd. No figures. No double. Only far ahead near the stone tower, there was one person standing. I already knew I shouldn't go closer, but I did anyway. When there were about 10 meters between us, the person slowly turned. It was Arthur Bell. I recognized him from an old photo in an archive article I had looked up earlier that day. Same thin features, same deep-set eyes. Only his face was gray like paper. "You're not the first," he said calmly. His voice sounded like it wasn't traveling through the air, but straight inside my head. "And not the last." I couldn't force out a word. "What is this?" I finally asked. He didn't look at me, but somewhere past me, toward the buildings. The city likes witnesses, especially the ones who keep looking at the same place for too long. First, you notice the emptiness. Then the emptiness notices you. Are they people? I asked. The ones on the bridge? He gave a faint, almost tired smile. What do they want? That's when he looked directly at me for the first time. For you to end up on this side. Something inside me snapped, like he wasn't warning me, but stating something that had already happened. I took a step back, then another, and at that moment I saw movement to the side. People were stepping onto the walkway, just appearing out of the darkness one after another. Dozens of them, silent, slow, and every single one of them was looking at me with something like expectation. I turned and ran. I don't know how I got home. I only remember looking back a couple of times and not seeing anyone. I rushed into the building, ran upstairs, locked the door, and without turning on the lights, sat down on the floor in the hallway. That's how I stayed until dawn. At some point I stopped feeling tired, only a strange silence inside, like everything had already happened. I just hadn't realized it yet. I don't go near the windows at night anymore, and I don't try to check. Because now I know how this ends. At first you just watch, then you start waiting, and then one night you go out, just to check, and you don't come back. For a long time I thought I managed to stop in time, but last night I went back to the bridge again. I was among those who stand too still, and too quiet. I was standing with them, and only then did I understand. From that side, it always feels like you're not one of them yet. If you've made it this far, you're ready for the next story. It's already waiting on the channel.